All right, well, good morning, everyone. Anthony Schmott from Tyndall Oliver. I'm going to do a quick little summary of the webpage like we always do. Everyone receives the notice that I have up on the screen for the webinar if you have made it here today. A couple of important hyperlinks on there. You have Dennis's email, the coordinator of the Academy, if there's any questions or upcoming topics and things related to that. The registration link is here as well if you would like to share that with someone that you think will find one of the webinars interesting. And our website is on here as well, TampaBayTrafficSafety.com/LATSA, which stands for Local Agency Traffic Safety Academy. A click to that takes you to our webpage where we have the completed webinars for this year as well as the upcoming webinars. There's only 2 left for the year. The registration link is there as well. And this is the location where we also post all of the presentations and recordings for the past webinars that we've done for the past several years. Down at the bottom, there is also a link for the PDH request form. Note that that request form is also uploaded to the handouts of this webinar, so you can download it directly from there. So this is the place that you go to for information related to the Academy. With that, I will hand it over to Dennis, and we'll do his introduction.
Good morning. I didn't get the screen thing. Good morning. This is Dennis Falloon, and the District 7 Safety Academy Coordinator and Consultant, and I'm welcoming you to the 11th District 7 Safety Academy webinar for 2016. And I'm going to do my intro, and then I'll introduce our presenter for today. This is the District 7 Local Agency Traffic Safety Academy, and the purpose of this academy is to provide webinars that provide information regarding safety-related issues that will help to enhance your local safety programs. This is the 4th year of the District 7 Safety Academy. It began in January and will end November 16, 2016. The webinars run at a minimum of 1 hour, but no more than 2 hours. And as Anthony's already explained to you, there's a place to go register, and the link is right on the screen, and also the link to the web page. This is a listing of all the topics that are currently that we've done for this year, and all the ones that have been marked that are completed. And like Anthony mentioned, we have 2 left, and today is Innovative at Grade Intersection Design. Also, to let you know, this session is being submitted for AICP credit, and to just continue to let you know that we're in the process of pulling together the 2017 topics, and we'll get those out to you before the end of the year. Also, this is the information about if you're a professional engineer and you want to get credit for this webinar today. And there's a link here also that Anthony showed you previously to get the form and get that credit. And as he mentioned, this is my contact information. So if you have any questions or concerns, you can let me know. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Mark Doctor. He is a safety and design engineer with FHWA Resource Center in Atlanta, Georgia. He has been with FHWA for over 28 years, and he's currently responsible for deploying innovative and flexible design and safety practices on a national level with focus areas in intersection safety, innovative intersections, freeway interchange design, and performance-based design solutions. So he's also got his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Clemson, and he's got a master's degree in transportation engineering from the University of Florida, and he's a licensed PE in Georgia. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and
all right, thank you, Dennis. And to kick things off, I'd like to open up a poll pod question.
So this question here is about your level of knowledge about the innovative intersections. This is going to come in 2 parts. Please check all that apply. GoToWebinar allows for 5 choices when we're doing polls, and we have more than 5 innovative types of intersections. So I'll let the audience type their responses here. We'll show the results, and then we will do the second part that shows the rest of the possible the intersections that Mark will be talking about today.
Also, Mark will have to pull his screen up.
Yeah. Yeah, the panelists don't vote, Mark. I don't think you can see the responses as they're coming in.
Right, I can see the poll pod, so I can see what's coming in, and it's looking good. 100% so far for roundabouts. That's impressive. No doubt, roundabouts are probably the most common type of, if we could call them innovative or alternative at this point. Roundabouts, we hope, are fairly mainstreamed. And glad to see a pretty good familiarity with the continuous flow intersection. We'll talk about that this morning as well.
Yeah, showing the responses, the results of the poll there. So yeah, like you were saying, everybody's heard of roundabouts. Continuous flow intersections.
The continuous flow intersections is second. That's interesting.
And let's do the second part of that.
All right, I'm starting to see some responses come in for the second part of our question here, and got some good familiarity with the Michigan left. Seeing a lot of responses for that, and seeing some good responses with the J-turn intersection. We'll talk about that. Some of these intersections go by different names, and actually I put a couple in here to try to fool you or trick you. There really is no such thing as a K-turn intersection. If somebody wants to invent it, great, by all means. But I'm not familiar with anything called the K-turn. So we've got a few people fished in on my trick question there. And same thing with the Rhode Island right. I'm not familiar with the Rhode Island right, but if someone, especially from Rhode Island, wants to invent something, that would be great. But thought I'd make sure we keep everybody honest here. So thank you, Anthony, for bringing up that poll question. That's fun. So I guess we're ready to get started. Let me make the transition here, and should be moving over to my screen. Are we sharing at this point?
Yes.
Anthony? All right, very good. All right, excellent. Let me go into the proper mode here. All right, well, good. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad there's this kind of interest in innovative intersections. I'm glad to be part of the local agency Traffic Safety Academy here. Again, I'm Mark Doctor with the Federal Highway Administration's Resource Center, and I want to focus on some of the things that are probably most critical. We could spend at least a day talking about innovative intersections, but I want to focus on some things that you really need to know about. But before we get started, I'm just interested, when I say innovative intersections, I would expect some different reactions. And just want to think to yourself, how do you feel? Do you say, oh yeah, I love this stuff. This is new, exciting, innovative stuff, fantastic. Or is it more like, oh no, this is going to create more work for me. This is going to complicate things. And oh, maybe if I just keep my mouth shut, all of this will blow away. I won't have to worry about it in a few months or a year. And what's wrong with our regular intersections? Intersections are fine. What's wrong with a normal signalized intersection? Or, oh, this is Florida, and our drivers will never get used to it. We've got unfamiliar drivers, a lot of tourists. We've got a significant older driver population. Those things may work elsewhere, but they're not going to work here. Get a lot of that sometimes. Or I don't think I'll get it as a driver. These things seem kind of confusing, and let alone as an engineer, as a driver, I think I may struggle going through some of these innovative designs. And oh, I remember we tried these years ago and it didn't work, and when are we ever going to wise up and learn that these things just don't work? Get all kinds of different reactions to innovative intersections. Some people say, oh, this is just another way to cheapen a project, reduce the cost. And if we don't have the money to build it right, well, let's not do it at all. Well, the reality is we do have budgetary limitations, and many of these innovative designs that I'm going to talk about can be good practical solutions. They may not have the same overall level of service as building a grade separated interchange, but if you never have the money to build a big expensive project, these can be better than doing nothing. And that's a little different way of thinking about modern engineering and the relationship of building projects that we can actually afford to build. And another reaction, well, I'm a bit skeptical, but I'll keep an open mind and I'll listen to what this guy has to say. And actually, of all the various feelings that I just went over, I hope this is how you truly feel. I want you to be skeptical. I want you to be thinking about the advantages and disadvantages of these innovative designs. These aren't perfect. These are not magic silver bullets. They have some drawbacks, and some of these are very context-oriented. In certain conditions, in certain locations, these can be choices. But if they're misapplied, or if they're designed improperly, or we don't take certain considerations into account, that can certainly be a big disadvantage. So keep a little bit of skepticism, but also an open mind. Because intersections in urban, congested areas are certainly a key challenge. And I'm sure we've all experienced corridors like what we see here in the picture. We just widened this corridor a few years ago. It's already 4 lanes in each direction. We can't add more lanes. We already have dual left turn lanes or triple left turn lanes, but yet traffic just doesn't seem to move through the corridor. I'm sure we've all experienced roads like that, even within our jurisdictions probably. So the traditional fix of building bigger intersections, bigger is not necessarily better. Bigger can be faster. Bigger can mean more crashes. And from a pedestrian standpoint, I feel sorry for these poor people. They have to pack a lunch, basically, to cross from one side of the road to the other. So these innovative designs allow us to change how we think about intersections, how we operate them, and they can allow us to not only build safer intersections, but also more practical intersections. Intersections are a certain safety concern. We know that about half of all severe crashes occur at intersections. This is based on national data. And if you think about it, an intersection is merely a point on a map. It is a very small percentage of the overall miles of highway system out there. But yet, intersections account for about half of the severe crashes that occur on our networks. So I want to start off with a little bit of what I hope is a basic review of signal timing. And when I talk about signal phasing, I'll start off with a very basic example where, in this case, we have an intersection aligned with a north-south movement and an east-west movement. And we have a very simple 2-phase operation. In the first phase, we're allowing the north-south traffic to proceed, and then we stop that movement, and in the second phase, allow the east-west traffic to proceed. So there's a green time and a red time associated with that. That's the very basic case of a signalized intersection. What typically happens at intersections when the volumes start to pick up, especially the left turn traffic demand, is we add a protected left turn phase. That's the green arrow. And anytime we add a phase to the intersection, we are essentially eating into the amount of green time available to the other movements. So if we think about it in terms of providing for all the movements at a urban intersection, let's say we start off with a protected left turn phase for the major or minor approach, and we add in a yellow clearance interval and then maybe a little all red, and then we let the through traffic speed in that direction. We give that some green time, and we terminate that with a yellow clearance interval, and then an all red. And then we go to the minor street, and sometimes the minor highways have a lot of traffic as well, so we provide a protected left turn phase for them with some green time, a yellow clearance interval, an all red, and then the side street or minor highway through movement, they get their green time, and that with a yellow clearance interval and an all red. So if you think about it, we're basically allocating time, allocating pieces of the pie, and no matter what our cycle length is, if we're dealing with 120 seconds or even 180 seconds or sometimes even greater than that, and 180 seconds, a 3-minute cycle, or sometimes operating longer than that, long cycle lengths can work against us as well. They can really create some lengthy queues while folks are waiting for the light to turn green. But no matter what cycle length we're dealing with, there are only so many seconds within that cycle length, and we have to figure out how to carve it up. And anytime we add signal phases, such as for the protected left turns, we are essentially stealing time away from the major street through movement, and that can increase the delay. Plus, the more phases that we have, the more lost time due to the yellow clearance intervals and the all reds. So what we try to do with many of these innovative designs that involve signalized intersections, it's basically tweaking the signal timing and coming up with creative ways to handle the left turn movements. So being able to take the typical 4-phase operation with the protected lefts from both the major and minor, and strategically altering that by relocating or redirecting the left turn movements, handling them in some other way, and getting back down to a 2-phase signal operation. It gives more green time to the major street through movement. And it may seem like a trivial thing, just adding an extra 15 seconds or 20 seconds of green time to the major street through movement. Well, it's not trivial. That additional green time, it almost has an exponential function where the benefit, the reduction in delay, increases greatly if we can provide additional time to keep the major street moving. So these innovative designs, many of them do involve the improved operations, but they are also, at least the ones we're going to talk about today, have been proven to enhance safety, reduce crashes by reducing the conflict points or the type of conflicts that occur at the intersection. So not only are they safer, and they offer less delay, but in many cases these can also be lower cost alternatives. I almost sound like an infomercial, but wait, there's more. So in addition to safety, we have better mobility and often at lower costs. So that's really the exciting thing. So just in summary for this quick introduction about signal phasing, fewer phases are better, and it's usually the left turns that are problematic. And if we can get down to a 2-phase operation, that can be a really good thing. So my mantra for many of these designs to consider is all rights is all right. All right. The jokes keep getting worse, but I want you to keep that in mind. So an intersection where we have the right turns and a displaced left turn can be really, really advantageous. So let's think about some of the common issues, especially from a safety perspective. In this case, let's take a 4-lane divided arterial, kind of a higher speed condition. In this case, it could be more of a rural highway, 4-lane divided, open median. We have a minor street, a minor road intersecting with a major highway, and the minor street has stop control intersections. The major street is not stopped, it's uncontrolled, but coming from the minor highway, you have a stop control. So one of the very common safety concerns at this type of intersection are these far side right angle collisions. As drivers, we do an okay job of assessing for gaps in the near side of traffic, but where we sometimes struggle is in the far side and executing either the left turn or the crossing maneuver, and so we oftentimes see a lot of far side right angle collisions. They tend to be high speed and high severity crashes. So one of the safety mitigation strategies and one of the innovative intersections that can be applied in that type of scenario is the restricted crossing U-turn, the R-cut, but it goes by other names. It's also known as the J-turn intersection. It also goes by the name of the reduced conflict intersection. In Minnesota, the Minnesota DOT utilizes that term, reduced conflict intersection. Seems to go over well in terms of marketing that to the public. It's also known as a super street in North Carolina. You'll hear them refer to it as a super street design, or also sometimes you'll hear it called the synchronized intersection. But no matter what we call it, it is an at-grade intersection with a directional median, and the directional median provides so that traffic coming out of the minor highway must make a right turn and then a U-turn to come back if they wanted to make either the crossing maneuver or the left turn onto the major highway. Now, from the major highway, all movements are permitted. From the major street perspective, you can make a right turn onto the minor highway, you can make a left turn onto the minor highway, and obviously you can keep going straight through. The only difference is for traffic coming out from the side street, the only possible movement is to make a right turn, and if traffic didn't want to make the right turn, if they wanted to make a left or the crossing maneuver, they would utilize the downstream U-turn bay to come back. So that is the key difference. Traffic coming out of the minor highway makes a right turn and then utilizes a downstream U-turn maneuver to come back to either execute the crossing maneuver onto the other side of the minor highway or what would be a left turn. And this can be applied at either a unsignalized intersection or they can be signalized. It can be a signalized intersection that creates gaps for the traffic coming out of the minor street. So when thinking about this type of intersection, and I'll refer to it as the restricted crossing U-turn, but again, it does go by other names. It's as a traditional intersection from the perspective of traffic on the major highway. Major street through, the right, left turn can all be made. The only difference is coming out of the minor street, the indirect movement would be for the left turn or for that crossing maneuver. And this type of intersection can be applicable at a signalized intersection or an unsignalized intersection. It can be in a rural application, a suburban corridor, such as a signalized arterial in a suburban corridor. Probably not going to see a significant application in the urban center, primarily because of the type of highway that we're dealing with. It probably where we may not have the space. And that's not to say that it couldn't be possible, but more than likely this is going to be a suburban type of corridor. And primarily on a high-speed route, a multi-lane high-speed type of arterial, probably not on a low-speed, although the concept could have application. That's why I put the question mark there and not necessarily a no. And these can be utilized at a four-leg intersection, three-leg intersection, T intersections, or offset Ts as well. And primarily going to be multi-lane highways, although some agencies are looking at similar concepts even on a two-lane highway, one lane in each direction. But we haven't seen anything built to this point. And yes, all multimodal features, and we'll talk about this, how pedestrians, bicyclists can actually benefit from this design. So I'm going to use the term restricted crossing U-turn, but again, just remember that they do go by other names: super streets, synchronized streets, J-turn intersections, reduced conflict intersections. So one thing we could do is just do away with the name and just call it by the symbol. and it could be the intersection formerly known as the R-cut, and we just replace it with this neat little symbol that basically shows what traffic does coming out of the minor street. You make the right turn, and if you wanted to make a left or a crossing, you make a U-turn to come back. So the intersection shall now be named that crazy-looking symbol. Just kidding. All right, so the states that have implemented this design have seen very impressive safety results. Very impressive. Maryland has utilized this design for many, many years, and crashes decreased order of magnitude of 28 to 44%. North Carolina has had many successful implementations, 58 to 85%. These are great numbers. These are crash reductions that rival roundabouts. And Tennessee, a few examples from Tennessee with very impressive safety results. Now, there is a slight distinction between the unsignalized version and the signalized version. And in North Carolina, they would call this the super street. And here's an example where traffic coming out of the minor street does have a gap that's created by the signal, and then the U-turn location further downstream is also controlled by a signal. So even though in this application you would think, all right, the arterial now has an added signal, but the reality is traffic on the arterial only stops once. The signals are tied together, they are coordinated, and once traffic proceeds through the first signal on the arterial, they would then proceed through the main intersection downstream. So traffic only stops once. So in addition to being a great safety application in the rural environment, they're also very, very useful when we have a proliferation of four-phase signals because of new development. So new big box stores start to pop up, and what was perhaps previously a four-lane arterial that could really move a lot of traffic now is starting to see signals pop up everywhere to handle the new development. Well, rather than the traditional four-phase signals with the protected lefts that can quickly bring so that arterial down rapidly, if we were to go to a corridor of two-phase signals, the super street type of design, it really opens up a lot of advantages operationally. If instead of giving time to the protected left turns with the super street type operation, we're down to two phases. The right turns out of the minor highway takes place concurrently with the U-turn maneuvers, so it is just a two-phase operation. Even though there are essentially four signals now involved, they are operating essentially as one. And by bringing it down to two phases, it may actually open up the possibility of a shorter cycle length, and that shorter cycle length gives us even better operational advantages as well. So if we put these in a corridor type of application, another advantage is that at no point do we need to stop both directions of traffic at the same time. So in this example, in this figure, you see an eastbound and a westbound on the major arterial. Those movements essentially can operate like one-way pairs. We never really need to stop the two directions simultaneously like we would have to at a traditional intersection to provide for the left turns out of the minor highway. So each direction may operate essentially independently. And what that allows is some very innovative signal timing design. It's a lot easier to coordinate progression on a one-way street than on a two-way street. And also some other innovative things that could be applied. Let's say we're in an urban area that has a very heavy directional split. Maybe in the morning peak, traffic is primarily heading in one direction, and then in the afternoon it's a reverse and traffic is heading in the opposite direction. It's even possible to utilize different cycle lengths for the two different directions and alternate it by time of day. So all kinds of innovative, flexible signal timing opportunities are opened up when we implement this type of design in a corridor. So what about for pedestrians? It's a little different. It's certainly a little different. If of course, that depends on which movement we're talking about. So for a signalized restricted crossing U-turn, it essentially utilizes this Z-shaped pattern for the pedestrian crosswalk. Now, to cross the minor highway, if we wanted to go, say, from A to B or C to D, actually that could be a shorter crossing distance, and the pedestrian could get from A to B or C to D probably in less time than compared to a traditional intersection. But there's the disadvantage, say, to go from A quadrant to the D quadrant. There's an extra crossing involved, and to go from one side of the major highway to the other involves going out into the median, and that's typically going to be done in 2 stages. So the question of is it longer or shorter for pedestrians? It depends. A couple of the crossings are probably going to be shorter, and the B to E to C crossing may actually be about the same, especially if we can bring the overall cycle length down. But the A quadrant to the D quadrant crossing most likely is going to take longer because there is an extra crossing involved. But this is generally what it looks like, and you can see the pedestrian going out into that center channelized island. The crossing would generally be in 2 phases. So the pedestrian would basically be waiting out there in the middle. And at first glance, you may think, well, that's kind of awkward to have the pedestrian waiting there in basically the middle of a theoretically a high-speed multi-lane arterial. But one thing to consider, when the pedestrian is waiting there in the center, that is the same time that the left-turning vehicles, and you can see in the photo the left-turning vehicles there in the channelized center directional turn lane, they're stopped. The left turns proceed when the pedestrian would cross. So when the pedestrian is there in the middle, they basically have this buffer of stopped vehicles queued up in the left turn lane. So there is a little sense of some security. It's not like being right in the middle of high-speed traffic. It's one of these things where until you experience this intersection as a pedestrian, it may look intimidating. And I want you to be skeptical. I want you to think, this is how is this really going to be for pedestrians? Well, the reality is, if you get an opportunity to walk through one of these intersections as a pedestrian, I think in most cases you might be pleasantly surprised that actually it is and we have to also keep things in comparison because we're talking about a big intersection, busy intersection. So I want to compare apples to apples. We're not talking about a low speed, low number of lanes intersection. So in comparison to other high volume type intersections, I actually think there are many opportunities to design and create some pedestrian advantages with this type of intersection. And let me show you some examples of how we can even enhance things from a pedestrian standpoint. If we have the opportunity to go with a offset type of intersection. So for example, let's say we're in a corridor where the development is just now starting to occur. We have choices as to where we might be able to locate this driveway entrance to the big box store that is seeking a permit, and the big box development is still in the planning stage. So if we have opportunities in terms of where we locate these approaches, and then we can create an offset type of option, it actually allows the pedestrian crossings to be more intuitive. And the median could be utilized as a pedestrian refuge area. So something like this with the offset approaches option makes the intersection more traditional from the pedestrian standpoint, and can actually be a very pedestrian-friendly type of intersection option. Another consideration for pedestrians is at the locations where the U-turn movements are occurring. If those are signalized, if we're going with a signalized design and traffic on the major arterial is going to be stopped to allow for the U-turn maneuver, it opens up the possibility of having mid-block pedestrian crossings that really don't hinder the traffic operations. So adding mid-block pedestrian crossings without adding any delay, essentially, to vehicular traffic gives us an opportunity to perhaps make these designs even more beneficial to pedestrians. So adding these mid-block pedestrian crossings will not interfere with the signal progression. Now, from the bicyclist standpoint, well, one thing to consider, from the major highway, there are no differences. And this figure shows a bike path that may be a little hard to see. For the major highway, the bike path continues straight through. The only difference, the key difference for this design from a bicyclist standpoint would be from the minor street. So if we had say a bike lane from one side of the minor street going to the other side of the minor street, crossing the major highway, or if a bicyclist wanted to make a left turn, essentially the left turn from the minor street to the major street, that's where we have the differences. And there are options that the bicyclist would have. Certainly they could navigate the intersection like a vehicle, and in which case, following the rules of the road, would make a right turn from the minor street, utilize the U-turn bay, and come back. Probably not the most preferential, however. So another option would be, of course, to be treated like a pedestrian, walking the bike across from one side or the other, or depending upon local jurisdiction ordinances, whether bicyclists are permitted on sidewalks or not, there's whether they mount or dismount, but certainly crossing like a pedestrian is another choice. Another option could be a preferential bike cut-through, where we are essentially providing a movement for the bicyclist that the vehicle, the car, is not permitted to do, and that would be a crossing through the middle. And here's an example. Here's a photograph of, in this case, it's a more rural and an unsignalized application, but it kind of shows that break through the directional median channelization, where a bicyclist from the one side of the minor highway to the other side of the minor highway can cross through. But again, remember, from the major street perspective, there are no differences from the bicyclist perspective. From the major highway perspective, everything is the same. It's only how minor street bicycle traffic may be affected. So that's a description of the restricted crossing U-turn, or the J-turn. It goes by many different names. And at this point, before I get into the next design, there is a poll question that I would like to bring up. So I'm going to ask Anthony to help out here and bring up the poll question. So what we have are some options on the restricted crossing U-turn. And I'm seeing most people agree that it also goes by other names, and yes, it does. It really does. That's an important thing to remember. Rather than lock in on a particular name, I encourage agencies to be flexible and market the concept in whatever terminology you think will best resonate with your community. And yes, it is a great design for reducing the far side angle collisions. it may be signalized. This concept can be utilized in either a unsignalized or signalized type of condition, and it is very, very efficient as a signalized intersection because of the advantages with the two-phase operation. So I'm very encouraged by the results of our poll question. I think we've got the vast majority of folks that have gotten it. And the last one, that it prohibits pedestrians from crossing, absolutely not. There are opportunities to actually make this design very pedestrian friendly, depending upon the situation that we have. There are opportunities there. So thank you, Anthony, for that poll question. And at this point, do we have questions, Anthony, specific to the restricted crossing U-turn in the chat pod or question pod?
We had two that were more or less addressed, but if we want to kind of specifically talk about them, there was one about the applicability of the J turns. It seems that it would promote high speed left turns and rights, and those would be problematic for pedestrians. Would it really be only applicable for rural locations because of that?
Yes, excellent question. The concept can be applied in a rural, high-speed type of divided highway, and in that type of facility, we may not have pedestrian crossings. It depends on the context. Florida, it's hard to find even a real rural example anymore in Florida, but in many states with long rural corridors that are way outside of any type of communities, there's certainly a great application there. But when we start to get into let's say, a more developed type of corridor where pedestrians can always be present, and when volumes start to pick up, if we start to think about signalizing the corridor, that's where I think the opportunity to start to build in some advantage pedestrians occur. And I mentioned the potential advantages with the signalized application for crossing the minor street. It can actually be a shorter crossing. If we have a shorter cycle length, it can actually provide more crossing opportunities to the pedestrian. We would say within a given hour, the number of times that a walk indication would come up can actually be increased if we can go with a shorter cycle length. And the big bonus is if we have that opportunity to provide mid-block pedestrian crossings, protected mid-block pedestrian crossings that are basically in tune with where we have the signalized U-turn locations. So the short answer is it depends. It depends on the context and what opportunities exist. But I'm excited about the opportunities that could be there to design these intersections to actually provide advantages from the pedestrian standpoint. So excellent question. And Anthony, was there one more question there?
Yeah, more of a comment at this point, because it absolutely has been addressed. But pedestrians is definitely a focus of this area. And prior to you getting to the slide, there was a question about whether or not there's any instances where the U-turn locations are signalized as well, which would provide for mid-block crossings. So I mean that's definitely a huge advantage. We tend to have very far signal spacing, and we have problems with pedestrians crossing mid-block. So a corridor that is done in this fashion that has signals at those locations provides 3 times as many signalized crossing possibilities for pedestrians, which is a huge benefit.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anthony, and great questions. And I'm glad folks are particularly asking the questions about the pedestrians, bicyclists, or transit users as well, because that is a key consideration in all of these designs. We are certainly, we certainly have choices as designers, and there are trade-offs with any intersection design. But any opportunities that we have to provide better service for all of the modes and take advantage of those opportunities. And that's one reason why I'm excited about these innovative designs, is I think they do offer some opportunities that we perhaps didn't have before. So very good, Anthony. So I'm going to continue. Oh, I'm sorry.
When you get to the current slide, there's a question about the terminology of what the word loon means on your first bullet.
Thank you. Yeah, great, great question. So we'll move on to our next design, and thank you for pointing that out, because I will talk about what a loon is, and we're not referring to the bird, but a design type. So we're going to leave the restricted crossing U-turn, or the J-turn, whatever we want to call it, and we're going to go to something similar. The median U-turn. It also goes by some other names. You may have heard it referred to as the Michigan left, because in Michigan, especially up in the Detroit metropolitan area, many corridors have been utilizing this design going back to the 1960s. And what makes this similar and different from what we've talked about, well, it does involve displacing or having indirect left turns and utilizing the U-turn locations to accomplish those maneuvers. But what makes this intersection different is we've now allowed the through movement from the minor highway. So if you think about what we talked about in the restricted crossing U-turn, where all of the traffic coming out from the minor highway had to make a right turn, and if they wanted to make a left or a crossing maneuver, they would come back. Obviously, that design starts to become problematic when the through movement volume starts to pick up. Well, if that's the case, if we have a more significant through movement volume demand on the minor highway, this median U-turn concept may be a more applicable choice. But another difference with this design is that, unlike the restricted crossing U-turn, where the left turn from the major highway to the minor highway was permitted, in this case, the left turn from the major highway to the minor highway is made by going through the intersection, utilizing the U-turn bay, and coming back. But what the main intersection, what the advantage of doing this is that that main intersection is now down to a two-phase operation. So just to repeat, to make the left turn from the major highway to the minor highway, traffic goes through the intersection, as you can see in this orange dotted line, goes through the intersection, utilizes the U-turn bay, comes to right. From the minor street, if traffic wanted to make the left turn, they would make the right turn, utilize the U-turn bay, and come back, similar to the restricted crossing U-turn. But the key difference here is now the minor street through movement is permitted. So the major highway through, the major highway right, same as a traditional intersection. But what's different is the major highway left turn. That's now made with that indirect movement going through the intersection, making a U-turn and coming back. And from the minor street, from the minor road, the through and the right turn, of course, can be made same as a traditional intersection. The only difference is the left turns, indirect left turns. These are going to be signalized intersections. This is going to be on a corridor, a signalized corridor, primarily going to be in a suburban core. It's possible to have it in an urban core. There are some urban corridors that do have a median that could be utilized. Probably not going to see these in a rural type of setting. These are signalized intersections. Not to say you couldn't. It's just that probably not going to be a typical rural application. Mostly a higher speed corridor. I guess the potential also for a lower speed environment. These are going to be four-legged intersections on multi-lane highways, and we're also going to talk about the multimodal advantages of these as well. But the key operational advantage is the two-phase signal operation. So even if the U-turn locations are signalized, they essentially operate like one intersection. So the major street through movement would occur in the first phase. And then in the second phase, the major street through movement gets stopped. And in the second phase, the minor street through movement proceeds, and at that same time the U-turn maneuvers would occur. So we're down to a two-phase signal operation. By doing away with those protected left turn phases, not only does it offer the opportunity to give more green time to the arterial through movement and also reduce the number of clearance intervals and lost time, but as a result of doing all that, it might be possible to move the same amount of traffic with a shorter cycle length. So this figure shows for a case study where a before condition with a 150-second multi-phase cycle was converted to the two-phase operation, and with the same volumes, able to do that or process that traffic essentially in a 90-second two-phase cycle. And anytime we can bring the cycle length down, that gives us even more operational advantages for all users as well. It opens up the opportunity for more pedestrian crossing times within a given hour. So certainly operational benefits and safety benefits. In Michigan, where they have the most experience with this type of design, their studies show about a 30% reduction in the injury crashes. So very, very impressive from a safety standpoint as well. From a pedestrian perspective, that median offers opportunities to serve as a refuge area. So depending upon the specifics and how the signals are timed, it may be possible for a pedestrian, especially a fast pedestrian, to possibly cross in one stage, but more typical probably would be a two-stage crossing where the median is a pedestrian refuge, but it could be possible to cross the major highway in one stage. Crossing the minor highway can be done in one stage, and actually that minor road crossing is probably very typical, very much like a traditional intersection. But one added advantage from the pedestrian standpoint is there are no left turns being made at the main intersection. From a pedestrian and a vulnerable user standpoint, the left turns are often a challenge or a safety concern from a pedestrian standpoint, especially if we're dealing with a permissive left turn. Under the permissive left turn case, a driver's attention is primarily focused straight ahead. They're looking for gaps in oncoming traffic, and the driver may not be paying attention to the pedestrian that is in the crosswalk, and as they're trying to make the left turn, and if they do get a gap, a permissive gap to make the left, that left turn over the pedestrian crosswalk is oftentimes a very serious and significant safety issue that we have at traditional intersections. Well, because there are no left turns at this type of intersection, that does away with a conflict that can be very problematic to pedestrians. So another potential advantage there. And if we can bring down the overall cycle length, and because we're down to the two-phase operation, it's advantageous to the pedestrian in terms of the amount of walk indications that will come up during say a given hour, and just also an opportunity for perhaps a longer walk interval as well. So opportunities to improve the pedestrian crossing. Plus, just like as we discussed with the restricted crossing U-turn, if those mid-block U-turn locations are signalized as well, it opens up that possibility to provide that protected mid-block pedestrian crossing as well without affecting operations to vehicular traffic. Now, for bicyclists, And the difference for bicyclists would be with the left turns. The through movements are basically going to proceed normally. Just like vehicular through movements are normal at this type of intersection, bicycle left turns bicycle through turns are going to be normal. It's the left turn that becomes different. So there are options here as well. Certainly the bicyclist could be treated like a vehicle and expected to make the right turn in the U-turn, but that's probably not the most desirable. There's always the option of being handled like a pedestrian and utilizing the pedestrian crossing. But another potential innovation is the bicycle box, and that's shown with the blue arrow in this diagram, where the bicyclist that wants to make the left turn at the intersection proceeds with the vehicular traffic when given the green indication, and once on the other side, once on the far side of that intersection, they wait in a bicycle box, reorient themselves, in this case to the east-west direction, and then when the light changes and then when vehicular traffic gets the green to proceed in the westbound direction, then bicyclists can proceed as well. This bicycle box concept is actually being applied at traditional signalized intersections as well, and it's perhaps a good way of handling left turn bicycle demand at higher volume, bigger signalized intersections. So the concept could also be applied at the median U-turn, but it's really not different from a traditional signalized intersection. So if you're skeptical, at this point you're saying, yeah, that's fine and dandy, but how do I apply this concept if I don't have a median? What if I don't have this nice wide median to be able to build in those U-turn locations? Well, that's what we're going to talk about next. And this is where we're going to talk about the concept of the loon design as well. So other agencies have successfully applied this concept even on roadways that don't have a median. If we don't have a median, well, one of the concerns is accommodating the needs for making that U-turn maneuver away from the main intersection. So what can be done is the construction of these bulb outs or bump outs or loons. Some agencies call it a loon, but it's essentially a bump out or a bulb out away from the main intersection to accommodate the U-turn maneuver. And even with a median, sometimes the bump out or bulb out is needed to accommodate a truck, for a truck to make a U-turn. But certainly if we don't have a median, it provides added need for a well-designed bump out or loon to accomplish the U-turn maneuver. Now, the picture shown here is from Utah, the Salt Lake City, Utah area. Constructed several of these designs. In Utah, they call it the through turn, and that does help with marketing because to make a left turn, traffic proceeds through the intersection, makes a U-turn at a bump out or loon, and comes back to the main intersection to then make the right turn. That would be the left turn maneuver. So the concept can be applied even when we don't have medians. So here's another example of the Utah through turn intersection, this one in Draper, Utah in the Salt Lake City metro area. This particular one is adjacent to a freeway interchange, Interstate 15, you can see there on the left side of the photo. And a lot of times when we have a lot of development around a freeway interchange, it's that intersection adjacent to the interchange that can be very problematic. In this example, you see that the interchange itself is a single point diamond, which operates typically with a three-phase signal operation. And if we provide protected left turn phases at the adjacent signalized intersection, oftentimes, especially if that adjacent intersection is fairly close to the interchange, if that intersection starts to fail It can actually create queues that back up into the interchange. If the interchange intersection starts to fail, it can have a domino effect, start backing traffic up on the exit ramp, and could possibly even back traffic up onto the main line of the interstate. So that domino effect is certainly a challenge that we see in many urban areas. And that was a situation that we're looking at here with this example. And you can see from the photo, development on all four quadrants of the intersection. Building that intersection to be bigger, really not a practical choice. Building that intersection as a grade-separated interchange, not a practical choice given the amount of development on there. So when you run out of options, one of the few things left in our toolbox is reducing the number of signal phases at that problematic intersection. And that's what this design, the through turn or the median U-turn concept, allows. By taking out the protected left turns and eliminating the left turn phase, it gives more green time to the through movement. It helps clear out that congested intersection. So in this case, you see the three bulb outs or loons. And there's a couple in particular that I want to focus on. There's one down here at the southern part where the U-turn is part of a T intersection. In a urban area, we may not have a lot of choices or good options on where that U-turn or bulb out can be located. In this example, in this retrofit, it was actually constructed part of an existing three-leg or T intersection. Complicates things a little bit, but it still allows the concept to proceed. And then you see another example where the U-turn, the bulb out, also serves access into that big retail establishment up there. So let's take that the same example, and let's focus on the one on the south, the U-turn that is in conjunction with the T intersection. Makes it a little more complicated because the signalized intersection here also provides for the left turn coming out of the minor street, but if you don't have any good choices and to put an independent U-turn location in, it is always possible to do something like this, where it's co-located with a T intersection or possibly co-located with a entrance into a commercial area. And here's just an example of what some of the signing looks like at a Utah through turn. The key message being at the main intersection, no left turns. And in the photo, you might be able to barely make out next to the signal head. You see the green ball of the indication of the signal head. Next to it is a blank out sign that is used to indicate no left turn. That's the key message at these intersections. No left turn at the main intersection. To make the left turn, and we want to get that information back to the driver in advance of the intersection, use the right lane, make a right turn, and you see the diagrammatic sign there indicating to make the U-turn movement and come back. And that diagrammatic U-turn sign, I will throw in a little caveat here. In some of my pictures, you may see some differences in how agencies have depicted this. There's actually a study that just recently got kicked off. It's a pooled fund study from the traffic control device folks that's actually going to be looking into these diagrammatic type signs of the U-turns and do some human factors research so that we can hopefully nail down what is a better arrow, perhaps, the thickness of these lines, some of the subtle nuances. But this gives you an indication of the general way in which it's depicted, but we will soon have some research available to us to be able to get some better information on some of the details for this type of sign because we're seeing more and more of these applications and more of these utilized. And this is some of the signing at the actual U-turn location, this being one that's also in conjunction with the entrance or a left turn into a minor street. So you can see some of the unusual configurations for the arrows. Don't have to get into this level of complication. You can also see the signal head display being the U-turn arrow. Not you don't have to do all this, but I just want to show you what some agencies are looking into and experimenting with, and that's how we learn, by experimentation. It's not just Utah that is deploying these types of designs. Here's a good example out of Tucson, Arizona. In Tucson, they go with the term express left. It's another good catchy term, but the concept is identical. Traffic, instead of making a left turn directly at the intersection, goes through the intersection, utilizes the U-turn bay, comes back, and makes the right. And here's an aerial of that Tucson example, and another good indication of that loon or bulb out or bump out to accommodate the needs of a larger vehicle to make the U-turn maneuver. Now, there are other ways of achieving essentially the same benefit of going down to a two-phase operation at the main intersection. It's really about just how do we handle left turns in some other way besides a protected left turn phase. So here's an innovative concept with a couple of roundabouts on the minor street. So to make the left turn maneuver from the major highway to the minor highway, traffic would make a right turn, utilize a roundabout to facilitate the U-turn maneuver, come back, and then go through the intersection. So roundabouts, especially single-lane roundabouts, are very good at facilitating U-turn maneuvers. And you can see in the diagram, the roundabout on the right side of the figure isn't even a real roundabout. It's like a dummy roundabout just there to facilitate the U-turn maneuver. Perhaps it could facilitate a crossroad in the future, but a roundabout like that could be excellent at just facilitating a U-turn that could be implemented in conjunction with eliminating the protected left turn phase at the main intersection, getting it down to a two-phase operation. Another variation of this idea is the quadrant roadway intersection. And the quadrant roadway intersection involves a roadway in one of the quadrants that essentially handles the left turn maneuvers. The main intersection up in the upper right corner of the arterial and the cross street gets down to a two-phase operation. And even though we're adding a couple extra signals here, one on the arterial, one on the cross street, in conjunction with the quadrant roadway, if we think about it in terms of how it operates collectively, it still offers typically an advantage because of doing away with the number of phases at the main intersection. So by eliminating some or all of the left turn movements at the main intersection and putting it onto a quadrant roadway, we're reducing the number of signal phases at the main intersection and giving a benefit. So for example, we're going to take out the left turns at the main intersection. Instead of making the left turn directly, traffic could utilize the quadrant roadway. In the blue arrow example here, to make the left in the southbound direction, traffic would proceed through the intersection, make a right turn on the quadrant roadway, and come back. From the arterial, same thing. To take out the protected left turn movements, they can be redirected. You could utilize the quadrant roadway to come back, or in the case of the blue arrow, go through the intersection and utilize the quadrant roadway to come back. A good case study is in Ohio, outside the Cincinnati metropolitan area, on bypass Route 4 in Fairfield, Ohio. And here it shows an example of a constructed quadrant roadway. The advantage being all the movements are provided for, just some are more indirect than others. The location of the quadrant roadway, in which if you have a choice of which of the four quadrants of the intersection to locate the quadrant roadway, some of the movements are going to be more circuitous, and some are actually going to be more direct. In this case, in this example, the more circuitous movements actually correspond to the lower volume, the lower demand movements. That's always a bonus if the detriment is to the lower volume maneuver, and the higher demand movement actually gets the more direct routes. So the quadrant roadway intersection. Another concept that's been around for a while, the jug handle intersections. In New Jersey and Pennsylvania, you see a lot of these jug handle intersections. The concept being, instead of making a left turn at the main, or from the main highway to the minor at the intersection, you utilize the jug handle. You execute the left turn by making a right turn and then coming back and crossing over. So these jug handles, they've been around since the 1950s, and you see a lot of them in the New Jersey, Pennsylvania type area, and you make the left turn essentially by making a right turn. And Federal Highway Administration put out a technical brief on the jug handle intersections, talks about the operational benefits and also the safety benefits as well. The manual on uniform traffic control devices, the 2009 MUTCD, actually added signing for the jug handle type of intersections. The key message is getting traffic into the right lane and utilizing the jug handle to come back. There are different styles. There's the reverse ramp style. Again, this is a at-grade intersection. These are not interchanges. This is an at-grade intersection where traffic goes through, utilizes a reverse ramp to come back and cross over, and they can also be in conjunction with T intersections or also U-turn type of jug handles. Oftentimes these are put in on arterials with a divided median. So as part of access management, where traffic wanting to turn into driveways can't do so directly because of the divided median, so the U-turns become more demanded for U-turn maneuvers kicks in as traffic wants to essentially make the U-turn to come back and enter into driveways that may have been along the corridor. The key message, all turns from the right lane. This is an example from New Jersey, and you get onto the jug handle, utilize it to come back, and at the main intersection there are no turns. It is a two-phase operation. Give green time to the major street, stop that, green time to the essentially the jug handle or the minor highway. But by not having the protected left turn phases, it makes the operations at these two-phase signals very, very slick. So another concept that I want to cover is as we kick up to probably the higher level of traffic volume demand at a signalized intersection is the displaced left turn intersection, also known as a continuous flow intersection. And the key distinction of this type of design is that the left turn movements on one or more of the approaches, in this case it's just the left turns on the major highway approach, actually crosses over onto the other side of oncoming traffic. We displace the left turn bays and displace them in advance of the main intersection. Once traffic is on the other side of oncoming through traffic, those left turns can then proceed simultaneously with the through movement. In other words, the protected left turn can essentially occur at the same time that the through movement on the main arterial is taking place as well. So it still provides that protected left. It still handles a very high left turn demand, but without the need for the exclusive left turn phase, depending upon how many approaches. This could be done from both the major highway left turns and the minor highway left turns, but predominantly we see these on two of the approaches, or one or two on the main highway. Here's an example of one at a T intersection. This is actually the first displaced left turn intersection in the United States on Long Island, and it was an intersection that served a college, and so a high left turn demand into this entrance into a college, and this was the first displaced left turn intersection built in the U.S. And it shows how it operates in advance of the main intersection. You can see those two left turn lanes develop, and then the signalized crossover. And even though we have two signals, the main intersection and the signals for the displaced left turn, they operate like one. they are coordinated, and traffic on the main highway, once they proceed through the first intersection, they will also proceed through that downstream intersection as well. So the displaced left turn intersection or continuous flow intersection, these are going to be signalized. These are primarily going to be in your higher volume suburban corridors. We have seen applications on high volume rural signalized intersections as well. Probably not something you're going to see in the dense urban core, but where urban and suburban kind of blend together, certainly there's that possibility. Primarily going to be on a higher speed, higher volume type of roadway. Can be a four-legged or a three-leg intersection, and these are typically going to be multi-lane, at least for the major highway being multi-lane roadways. And yeah, multimodal opportunities here as well. But I do want to say that probably perhaps the overarching consideration with this type of intersection are your access management issues, especially at the quadrants of the intersection. If we're dealing with an existing intersection and contemplating utilizing this concept to improve or retrofit an existing intersection, one of the big factors is going to be the type of land use you have at the quadrants of those intersections. And primarily it's going to be the size of the parcels and the driveway needs. So for example, if we're dealing with some pretty small parcel sizes, like if it's a fast food restaurant, and those are generally smaller size lots, that's a big difference compared to, let's say it's a car dealership. If it's a car dealership, we may have more opportunities with regard to where those driveways get located. So access management issues, certainly a big part of the overall feasibility of this type of design. So from the pedestrian standpoint, we have some choices. In this sample configuration, this is a more traditional type of pedestrian crosswalk location. It goes across the right turn lanes, the displaced left turn lanes. But what's probably more common is utilizing the channelization and the potential for one-stage pedestrian crossings, but how that fits within the actual size of the space you have available at an intersection can vary. But it is possible to put in what could be some more traditional looking pedestrian crossings. And if we can further expand the use of the channelization, and here in this example, the channelization between the displaced left turn lanes and the through lanes provide, say, an added refuge area. It can even bring the crossing lengths down even shorter, and also eliminate that potential conflict between the walk indication and having to hold up the displaced left turns. Obviously, you can't have the left turns proceed when pedestrians are in the crosswalk. So there are choices, but also some trade-offs with regard to the operational advantages for getting those left turns to proceed, but having the added channelization for the pedestrian refuge islands. But overall, there are opportunities to get pedestrians across. Some crossings might be longer, but some might be actual shorter crossings as well. So I know I've given you not all of the information you probably need, and I hope I've whetted your appetite and you're wanting to get more information. So I want to put in a plug for the Federal Highway Administration's informational guides on these designs that we talked about, the median U-turn, the restricted crossing U-turn, the displaced left turn, also known as the continuous flow intersection, and another informational guide on the diverging diamond interchange. Hopefully most folks have heard about the diverging diamond interchange. We could spend a whole webinar just talking about that interchange type, but there's also a great informational guide out there on that grade-separated interchange style. Today we just focused on at-grade intersections. All of these references, the informational guides as well as some other resources, including information on roundabouts. We didn't want to highlight roundabouts today because that's another topic I think that stands alone by itself. But if you go to our FHWA intersection safety webpage, and I've given you the address there, you can download all of these references. The FHWA informational guides are in the PDF format and can be downloaded for your use. And in many respects, they represent the current state of practice and state of knowledge with regard to these innovative intersection designs. And one other tool that I want to offer to you, the Federal Highway Administration has developed a easy to use, a fairly simplistic but easy to use spreadsheet-based tool that looks at these innovative designs, including roundabouts and the diverging diamond. And this is available without charge, but we do ask users to register. And so I've given you our FHWA link here to our operations site, and by going to that web page, it'll ask you to register. That information isn't used for any purposes other than creating a database of who's downloaded the tool, and it allows us to send you an email if the tool has a new version that comes out. So the spreadsheet tool, it's called the Capacity Analysis at Junctions, or CAPX for short. It's real simple to grasp, and there's a little user guide that is part of the spreadsheet tool. But once you enter your intersection turning counts, there's the opening page where if you're studying an intersection, you probably have your turning demands, whether they be current year or future year. And so you put in your turning volume maneuvers. And once you enter that once into the spreadsheet, you can then click on these various intersection types, the restricted crossing U-turn, the median U-turn, the displaced left turn intersection, roundabouts, including mini roundabouts, and the diverging diamond interchange. And it's based on a very simplistic critical lane volume methodology. If you're familiar with the critical lane volume methodology, it's basically a very simplistic tool to do a rough assessment of where you probably stand in terms of your volume to capacity ratio. This is by no means a replacement for a more detailed analysis that you may want to do later on after narrowing down your intersection choices. This is nowhere near as sophisticated as a microsimulation model or even the methodologies that are coming into the Highway Capacity Manual. The next editions of the Highway Capacity Manual will actually provide methodologies to assess these innovative designs. But until those tools are out there, the CapX spreadsheet tool is, I think, a good starting point for you to at least get a screening level or sketch level analysis of how these innovative designs may function given the volumes that you're working on with your project. So the CapX spreadsheet tool has certainly been very, very useful. So with that, we've got one more poll question. And Anthony, if we could open it up to our last poll question. So now that you've seen an overview of these innovative designs, getting back to how we kicked things off about how do you feel about these, I'm liking the responses that I'm seeing. This is great. So it's a pretty good mix that can't wait to try one out. And still, I like you to be skeptical, but open-minded and hopefully a little more confident in where these designs may be applicable. And I'm hopeful that they can be a good solution for some intersection challenges that you may be struggling with in your agency. So with that, Anthony, I guess we're at a good point to continue with Q&A.
Sure. I believe the CapEx spreadsheet kind of answers one of the questions, but there was a question about the level of traffic volumes that will be warranted for the different types of treatments. I think the CapEx spreadsheet would allow a user to kind of punch in the numbers and see the operation, right, and kind of compare and get a list, or is there already a table somewhere that says, you know, if you have these kinds of volumes, you should consider this. If you have these kinds of volumes, you should consider this instead.
Right. That is a great question. And certainly volume is a key factor in assessing the feasibility of where these designs are going to be most appropriate. And I don't like to give definitive numbers, but I do like ballpark ranges, and so let's talk about that. And starting with the restricted crossing U-turn, the first intersection type that we talked about this morning. If we're dealing with a rural type of application, really from the major street perspective. Well, and even in an urban signalized perspective, there are no limitations with regard to the major highway, because it's a function of how many lanes do we have. If it's a 4-lane divided highway, if it's a 6-lane highway, or even an 8-lane highway, it's really the number of lanes on the major highway that kind of set that upper bound, just like at any intersection or any corridor. The key consideration from a volume standpoint in terms of feasibility is traffic coming out from the minor street. And the restricted crossing U-turn, both rural, unsignalized, and even more suburban signalized examples, generally speaking, lower volume minor street roads are going to be working better. That's the niche for that type of intersection. As a rule of thumb, if we have minor street volumes, the minor street ADT, if it's less than 5,000, if it's less than 5,000 ADT coming out of that minor street, chances are an unsignalized R-cut is going to work fine. Once we get above that, we may start to need to look at signalizing, and there's also a function of the major highway through traffic, because obviously the more traffic on the major highway, the fewer gaps that are going to be available to traffic coming out of the minor street to make the right turn. If we really have limited gaps for drivers trying to make a right turn out of that minor highway, we may need to signalize it and put in a signal to open up those gaps and create that traffic. But there are examples of signalized R-cuts or super streets where minor street traffic demand has gone up to 15,000, 20,000 ADT. It can still pump a lot of traffic, but obviously the higher the volume on the minor street, that is when the median U-turn design is probably going to take over as a better choice, because that then allows the through movement from the minor street. So I don't want to put a hard number on that, but no doubt the trend is as minor street volume increases, it's more likely that the restricted crossing U-turn is going to diminish as a favorable option, and the median U-turn type of design that allows the minor street through movement to proceed is going to then take over. Now, even with the median U-turn, we are still redirecting the left turns. So obviously, the higher the left turn demand becomes at these intersections, the reduction in favorability becomes for both the R-cut and the median U-turn, and that is when the displaced left turn intersection, or the continuous flow intersection, would start to take over as probably being your better intersection of choice. So the continuous flow intersection has its niche where we're dealing with the high volume of left turns. So and in context, even with these innovative designs, there are some practical limitations with regard to volumes. And if we start to really see very high volumes, that's when, of course, we get into that realm of looking at grade separations, grade separated interchanges. The downside there being obviously the cost and potential right-of-way impacts. But all of these designs, depending upon the number of lanes, both through lanes and turn lanes, start to reach their practical maximums at some point. And so the CapEx spreadsheet tool, I think, gives you a good starting point to kind of assess what range you fall within. And I like starting out looking at roundabouts. I like to start out looking to see if a single lane roundabout is going to operate, but obviously there are capacity limitations there. And then start to work my way up and work your way up all the way through the food chain of intersections, and perhaps at the top of the food chain is a grade separated interchange, and the diverging diamond interchange getting a lot of attention for its operational benefits. And so the CapEx tool does include the diverging diamond interchange. So great question. I know that was a long answer to a short question, but when it comes to traffic volumes, it really does depend, and volume is always a key input. But I want to leave you with another consideration when it comes to volumes. I think we also have to keep in mind a relative comparison to what I'll term a traditional intersection. And a traditional intersection, say, with protected left turn phases, protected left turn lanes, and we have many examples. In Florida, we've got many examples of existing signalized traditional intersections where we have some poor operations, and so I don't think it's reasonable to ever expect perfection in all of our intersections, operationally speaking. And if we look at our existing networks, there's a abundance of intersections, and sometimes it's trying to do the best we can within the constraints that we have. And so this notion of tolerating congestion, tolerating that perhaps during certain periods of the day our intersections will experience congestion, will experience delay. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are failing. A lot of times we hear that term failing intersections, and we commonly apply that to when we get to a level of service F. Well, level of service in intersections is based upon delay and our perception of tolerance of congestion, but I think that is a matter of context. And certainly for Florida, District 7, a lot of urban areas, and just a lot of examples where intersections experience delay. And sometimes I encourage agencies to take the approach of don't seek perfection, seek making it better than it is. And many of these innovative designs may not be able to do better than level of service F in a peak hour. But if they give you better performance during better percentages of the time of day, it should be a good consideration for enhancing your network. And I want to throw in the safety benefits, just like the infomercial. Not only do you get better operations, you get better safety. And that's really another key indicator as we evolve toward performance-based evaluations of options that we have. The safety advantages of these designs are really proving themselves quite well. So great question, and I hope that wasn't too long of an answer to a relatively simple question. Anything else, Anthony, on in the Q&A pod?
Sure, we've got a few. I like the infomercial. Like, there's a free ShamWow included with the design of every innovative intersection.
Great.
With regards to level of service that you mentioned, the CapEx, does that provide any level of service or delay? Like, what are the outputs from that?
Yeah, excellent question. We wanted to intentionally not put in a delay number or a level of service, and so what the output is essentially a volume to capacity ratio derived from the simplistic critical lane volume analysis. It is simplistic in comparison to, say, a highway capacity manual methodology, and very simplistic compared to what is offered through a microsimulation analysis, where you can really get into some of the details and domino effects of interrelated intersections. So that the CapEx tool is very sketch level, it's planning level, it's the critical lane volume methodology, and it's a starting point. It's really intended to be a starting point to help you screen potential candidate designs. But once you get down to a smaller array of likely feasible intersections, that's when other tools like highway capacity manual methodology or microsimulation is going to be much more appropriate. So the output is a simplistic V over C ratio, volume to capacity ratio.
On capacity, there's a question about cycle lengths. Would having a shorter cycle length mean more yellow and all red time? For example, a two-phase 200 cycle intersection will have 2 phases of yellow and red. In the same intersection with a cycle length of 100 seconds, you would have 4 phases of yellow and all red, which would be a greater delay.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. The more phases that we have, and if it's a typical intersection with protected left turn phases, we of course have the yellow clearance interval for the protected lefts, and perhaps an all red for the protected lefts. So yes, and anytime we add more phases within the cycle of the signalized intersection, we have essentially more lost time, and it's same thing with lost time due to the startup maneuvers. So yeah, anytime we can reduce the number of signal phases, not only are we generally able to allocate that time to more green time to the major street through movement, but we get that added benefit, and there's more. We throw in the steak knives. There's more. We throw in the added benefit of saving on those clearance intervals, the fewer all red intervals, and generally the less of lost time due to startup time. So absolutely, fewer phases are better, and the 2-phase operation really being a very impressive way of moving traffic on a high volume corridor.
Yeah, I think the person that was asking the question was alluding to, by having these alternative intersection designs, you indicated that you can reduce cycle lengths, and that is a good thing. And they were saying, well, wait a minute, if you reduce the cycle lengths, then you have more clearance phases. But I think the key point is that you are reducing a long cycle length with protected left turn phases to a shorter cycle length that are 2-phase signals. So the net result is actually less cycles for the shorter cycle length. So it's a net savings, even though it cycles more often.
Yes. If I'm understanding that correctly, absolutely. So let's say, for example, with protected left turns on both a major and minor highway, high volumes. Maybe your agency is running at maybe upwards of 180-second cycle. Certainly, if you take out the protected left turns, you may be able to run that corridor. If we have a corridor of two-phase signals, you may certainly be able to bring the cycle length down, and that is a possibility, and that can give added benefit in terms of reduced overall delay and improved travel time through the corridor. So yes, it does work hand in hand.
Yeah, I think the key there's a trade-off of force, the four-phase signal versus a two-phase. That's kind of an interesting one with regards to safety. I mean, we are eliminating or greatly reducing the possibilities of your left turns and your angles at the intersection, but then we're shifting over and having accelerations and shifting lanes in order to get over to the other side. Their question was, how long do the accel lanes need to be? But with regards to safety, also, I mean, are there any instances where we're trading off angles and left turns for increased side swipes and rear ends because of, kind of added confusion and those merges and shifting over to get to those U-turn bays?
Right, that's a great question, because you're absolutely right. When we look at the safety analysis and we look at say doing a before and after comparison, and let's take the restricted crossing U-turn as an example. The safety analysis does include looking at what's happening at those U-turn locations, because you're right. We're adding, we're actually shifting some of the conflict points and shifting them down to the U-turn locations. So all of those before and after cases that I showed, that was cumulative. That included the crashes that could result from those downstream U-turn locations. And even with that, it's still a very significant reduction, because what we're essentially doing is we're changing the type of conflict. It's compared to a higher speed right angle type of collision. If we are maybe trading, if I'm trading conflict points or trading collision types, a high-speed angle collision is generally going to be far worse, far more severe than, say, a rear-end type of collision that could be encountered from a vehicle that is decelerating to say try to get into the U-turn bay. So all of the before and after conditions looked at, whether it be a 3-year before and after period or 5-year before and after period, looked at those trade-offs. And there are trade-offs, but by eliminating those high impact, high speed, high severity, far side angle collisions, that is where we've seen the greatest benefit in safety. So it's not to say that collisions couldn't occur as a result of making the U-turn maneuver. They certainly can, but when you add up all of the conflicts, add up the crash experiences from around the country, the net safety benefits have been very, very impressive with the restricted crossing U-turns. And also, Federal Highway Administration recently conducted studies of signalized R-cuts, because we had a lot of great information about the unsignalized R-cuts and less so with the signalized. And recent research has confirmed even for the signalized R-cuts, a very impressive reduction in crashes, especially the high severity crashes. So yes, it's very impressive in terms of the safety results. So even if we are changing conflict points or moving conflict points, that offers opportunities for some great reductions in crashes.
Follow up on the CapX tool. With the VC calculations, can you put the existing traditional intersections in there so that they can compare to the possible alternate intersections?
Yes, that is another feature of the CapEx tool. It does have traditional signalized intersections, and you can adjust the number of lanes. So if you wanted to put in dual left turn lanes and 2 or 3 through lanes from the various approaches, it does allow you to take a traditional intersection and alter the number of lanes in the CapEx tool. So it's a very easy to use tool, but again, it's a starting point and not intended to replace a more thorough operational analysis after you've weeded out some options.
You would expect the bow tie type intersection to have savings on travel time versus the signalized U-turn?
Yeah, another great question. Yeah, with the bow tie design, it's essentially just another way of facilitating the indirect left turns. So the main benefit is at that main intersection, the main signalized intersection, by taking away a protected left turn phase, we're basically facilitating movements at the main intersection, and the left turns would be accommodated by way of making a right turn on a minor street, utilizing the roundabout to make a U-turn and come back. So that's another example where the actual volumes that you're dealing with are going to be very dependent upon whether that's a feasible option or not. But for cases where perhaps the left turn volumes are modest enough that taking away that protected left turn could really help you with the operations on the major highway. And single lane roundabouts in particular are very good at facilitating U-turn maneuvers, and so that bow tie concept is just another tool in the toolbox. But it's all about how we handle a redirected left turn movement.
Somewhat related with roundabouts, there's a question about how common 3-lane roundabouts or the multi-lane roundabouts are in the U.S.
Yeah, there are examples of 3-lane modern roundabouts, and I hope most people are aware of the distinction between modern U.S. roundabouts and some of the older rotaries that we still have. If you go to the New England area, you'll see a lot of the older style rotary intersections. The key difference with the multi-laners is that a modern U.S. roundabout, the design principle is we try to get the driver into the proper lane on the approach to the roundabout, and once they're in the proper lane of the multi-lane roundabout, they enter the circulatory roadway in a given lane, and they stay in that lane and exit the circulatory roadway, exit the roundabout from that lane. There's no lane changing, there's no weaving, and that is a key differential between a modern multi-lane U.S. roundabout and older rotaries, older traffic circles that sometimes do require lane changing and weaving, and that historically has been problematic and a challenge to a lot of the older rotaries. So modern U.S. roundabouts generally tend to be smaller, lower speeds, lower operating speeds, and for the multi-lane roundabouts at least, following that principle of not having to weave, not having to change lanes. But that concept has been applied to even 3-lane modern roundabouts. I know in the Michigan, Detroit area, there's several examples of 3-lane roundabouts and some other locations as well. But whether it's a 3-lane roundabout or even a 2-lane roundabout, the data so far has shown that there is a significant to single-lane roundabouts. By far, single-lane roundabouts have given us the best safety performance. That's not to say that multi-lane roundabouts, especially if we compare signals to even multi-lane roundabouts, it's still very encouraging that overall most multi-lane roundabouts still have better safety performance than signals. But if we can keep a roundabout as a single-lane roundabout, that is the simplicity of a single-lane roundabout, the safety performance of a single-lane roundabout is hard to top. And so one of the cautions that I put out there for agencies to consider is, will a single-lane roundabout give you satisfactory operational performance for the foreseeable future? And if so, consider a single-lane roundabout that can be expanded to a multi-lane roundabout in the future, if and when you need it. But if you don't need that capacity of a multi-lane roundabout today, why not enjoy the safety benefit and simplicity of a single-lane roundabout that can be expanded later on? I see a lot of agencies jump right into higher capacity roundabouts based upon future year projections, and it's something where you may not need that capacity for quite some time down the road. And so a wiser approach might be build a single-lane roundabout at first with the ability for it to be expanded, and expansion can be relatively simple. If we have all of our basically infrastructure, if the sidewalks, the utilities are all kicked out, and widening the roundabout is basically building within, it's a fairly modest project. And so I've seen some very innovative things like splitter islands and truck aprons that have the concrete joints that are intended to be removable, where in the future when that added capacity is needed, it's a relatively simple and inexpensive way of expanding capacity, but yet enjoying a single lane roundabout initially. So that's kind of the trend that agencies are going toward, because sadly we have seen the reverse, where some multi-lane roundabouts that have had some safety concerns have been retrofitted to single-lane roundabouts. And once they're single-lane roundabouts, they work just great, but it was just an indication that the single-lane capacity was adequate, and just for various reasons, the multi-laner was built initially, and that may not have been the wisest choice.
So we're at 5 minutes before 12. We'll get to a couple of the DLT, the displaced left turn intersection questions before we are out of time here. With regards to the signals at those, is that 2 or 3 coordinated signals? Is it one controller? How is that set up?
They are certainly all coordinated. Whether you do it on one controller or 2 does depend. Sometimes, depending upon some of the issues with how many complications, like with the pedestrian calls that we may be running, may be actually more advantageous to go with 2, but it's possible that a single controller, depending upon the length of where that downstream crossover intersection is, that it could be run as one. In all cases, however, it is essentially functioning like one intersection. All of the crossovers, the left turns that are displaced and occur back in advance of the main intersection. The ideal and the way the continuous flow intersection gets its name is that ideally the left turns cross over in advance, get over into the displaced left turn lanes, and when they hit the main intersection, they are also allowed to proceed straight through. So the details, the length of the lane for the left turns, whether it's a single left turn or dual left turn, obviously dependent upon not only the demand of traffic making the left turn maneuver, but also what is best in terms of getting that progression so that hopefully we do achieve that continuous flow. And once the left turns make the crossover maneuver, they're also afforded the opportunity to then make the left turn at the main intersection without having to stop twice. So there's a lot of some subtleties that go into the sophistication behind the timing, and so that may be a determining factor in terms of how you actually run it through the controlling cabinet equipment.
We have 1 minute left before time runs out. I want to respect everyone's lunchtime and not keep anybody late. But I mean, if you don't mind, Mark, I've got a question for you regarding to the displaced left turns as well. I mean, one is the right-of-way requirements. You know, kind of access to, like, if you have a gas station in one of the quadrants, it's now much more difficult to get to. Public involvement. How do you manage, the right-of-way, the access, the public involvement, and just kind of getting the buy-in from people to get these in there? Because I love the design, but it seems like you'd have a little bit of pushback initially until they're proven in a particular community that they actually are a good idea.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It in addition to the general apprehension that the community might have about something that's different like that, the access management is key, and there are some things that can be done. I didn't mention with the displaced left turn intersection the benefit of having a right turn bypass lane. When those displaced left turn lanes are then on the other side of oncoming traffic, coming from the minor street, it's advantageous if we have that right turn bypass lane, because if we don't have that, one expectation drivers have is when they're coming from the minor street wanting to make a right turn is you turn into the nearest lane, generally speaking. And if that nearest lane is the displaced left turn lane, it can be a challenge to get drivers accustomed to not turning into that nearest lane but going beyond those. So having that right turn bypass is a benefit. And that right turn bypass lane can also serve as a right out type of access to the parcel that might be there. So in addition to being a right turn bypass lane, it can also serve as a sort of a right out access point, and perhaps utilizing a U-turn further down on the arterial as well. So access management is definitely a key consideration and could be a showstopper in some contexts for why the displaced left turn intersection might not be a good fit at a particular location.
I think we've covered everything in the chat. I'll go ahead and end the recording here. I mean, thanks everyone for attending. We went over a few minutes, but that's all right, and we'll stay on the line for a second in case there's anything else that comes in. Again, the PDH information, there's a question about that as well. It can be downloaded from the website. There is a link in the email notice that you received to arrive here today that has a link to the website, and it is also available to download from the handouts right from the GoToWebinar window. There are instructions inside of the Word document of what to do once you have that Word document. That's where that information is located. And the next presentation is on November 16th. That is on safety data and analysis, developing emphasis area plans. That will be presented by Larry Hagan. Dennis, do you have anything else to add before I end the recording?
No, I just wanted to tell Mark, thank you so much for giving this presentation today. I learned a lot from it, and I'm sure all the other people did too. And we probably had about 93 people on at one time, considering that's also the 20% factor included, so 93 to 100. So that was really good, and I will be in touch with you once I talk to Matt Weaver and Anthony about your list of topics and see if there's any I need to pass by you to see if the possibility of putting those in the presentation. All right?
I want to let the audience know as well that I created there's a survey that should be going out to everyone. I clicked the checkbox. It's the first time that we use it in GoToWebinar to receive a little bit of feedback on the presentation, to kind of solicit some webinar topics for the coming year. So if you can please take a moment to fill that out. Hopefully the system sends that and it all works correctly. So I'd like to get some feedback on how that worked. That would be great. I guess with that, I'm going to end the webinar. We'll stay on the line for a few minutes in case anything else comes up. Thank you, everyone, for attending.